regardless of how you look at it, it's focused on the people side of the business, and more, the people side of the business is the business, right?
Hi, it's John Bernatovich, your host of the HR Like a Boss podcast. Welcome to Season 3. I've embarked on a journey to get to know amazingly awesome HR and business professionals with the hope of finding what it takes to do HR like a boss. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thank you for checking out the HR Like a Boss podcast. I'm super excited on today's show to have Gary Szelagowski. Gary is a longtime friend of mine. We networked years and years and years ago. I really am so thankful to have him as a friend in my HR community and super excited to have him on the podcast. Gary, welcome to the HR Like a Boss podcast.
Glad to be here, John. Appreciate being here and glad to connect on your podcast.
So I start all guests out with the same question. And how would you describe the purpose of human resources?
Yeah, I kind of have an updated purpose, I think. So, right, everything changes over time. So I often talked about HR as being kind of the bridge between the real operations of the business and the people side of the business. And we've all been through a global pandemic, right? So as I was thinking about answering this question today, the bridge makes the people side seem more distant from the operations of the business than maybe we want it to be. So maybe HR is more the health department of the business, right? So we're monitoring what's going on in the business, and we have expertise when things go awry to help solve those kinds of things. So, but regardless of how you look at it, it's focused on the people side of the business, and more, the people side of the business is the business, right? So we're the experts in that space, and there to help the rest of the organization leverage the assets that live in their people.
Do you have any thought process on how the impact of the Great Resignation and this attrition that's happening, and what employers can do to combat it, to be strategic about that number one thing, their people?
Yeah, I think it's always been interesting, right? It's how we make money as consultants in the space, but it's also what keeps us the gears spinning and keeps us productive in the HR space. So I think I've become more and more aware. So think about what we've been through since the pandemic broke. There was this big runoff with the shutdown and everything like that. And then the economy reemerged, and now with the looming clouds of recession, it's almost been like a roller coaster ride, right? So it's gone from pushing people out the doors because of COVID to trying to get them back in, and people deciding they weren't happy in the Great Resignation, right? And now it's there's talk of, well, you see it in the tech space, right? The layoffs are starting. So it's just a weird scenario over the last 3 years. And I think that one of the things that I've become aware of just over the last 3 weeks is a lot of those people from the Great Resignation are actually rebounding back to the organizations they left. I was at a seminar where this was spoken of, and that was on a Thursday. Saturday night, I was at a 50th wedding anniversary for friends of ours. Their son is one of those rebounders. He left for greener pastures and found out the pastures weren't that green. And he actually was in the sales space. He's back to his original employer, who wanted him back badly enough that he's working in the office through a non-compete agreement until they can put him back in the field. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on. And I think the companies that are creative and taking some risks in the way that Eddie's, sitting on the bench waiting to get back in the sales game, not every company's created enough to think of that. They'd be out finding the next guy that could pound the pavement today. But I think people who are being creative with those kinds of approaches and solutions are the ones that are going to win in this thing. You referenced the McKinsey article. They and there's different spins on this over time too, right? But they stratify 4 or 5 different personas, and I think part of that creativity is target marketing, if you will, those personas, and coming to each with an approach as opposed to trying to paint with a broad brush and say, come work for us, and not having any distinction that what attracts me might be different than what attracts you, John, or what attracts somebody in the 20 to 30 age bracket is a different value proposition altogether. So
How important do you think that financial acumen is for an HR pro?
You've got to have it. I mean, it's non-negotiable almost. So you think about what I said at the top about the purpose of HR is ensuring the health of the people part of the organization to deliver for the organization. You need to know what the organization needs delivered. And so the financial piece of that, if you don't know how the company makes money, you're not going to be sensitive to how to best deploy the people to that end, right? So you have to have a basic level of appreciation for how the company makes money and frankly how the company incurs cost. There are some organizations where, and most of the organizations I work for, the biggest part of their cost structure was the people. So by definition, the people part of the equation gets a lot of attention. And you need to know that, as opposed to an organization where maybe they have a lot of capital costs. If it's a big, manufacturing organization, the structure is different, then the emphasis on the people is going to be different in that organization. But you need to be aware of that. And you need to be aware of that to stay ahead of the curve. So, when I was with National City and the Great Recession was coming, the writing was on the wall. You could, as our CFO described at the time, right? This is a finance conversation. We were writing mortgages, and a big part of how we were making money was bundling those mortgages and selling them off. So we were putting as he described it, we were putting a lot of money in a bathtub, and it was running out the other end, and we were making some spread on that in between. I understood that as an HR person. And when I saw what was happening, as he described it, somebody put a plug in that bathtub. Well, the organization's in trouble when the bathtub starts overflowing. So we had to make a lot of people moves in that scenario. And the Great Recession was widely publicized, but I knew some of the math that led us to that place. So, and then at a more tactical level, a big part of my career was in the compensation space. So again, if I'm paying salespeople, I need to know the margins on what they're selling, so that I know how much of that margin the organization is willing to spend on compensating that team to come up with the right mix. Do we pay it in salary? Do we pay it in incentive pay of some sort? So there's a lot of financial information that goes into that as well. So I was in one organization that ignored some of those facts and actually shut down their sales incentive plan in August of a given year because they ran out of money to fund it. And I left that organization in December of the prior year because I saw that coming. So it's an imperative. You've got to have an appreciation for it as an HR person.
So how would you, Gary, describe someone that does HR like a boss?
So I would, I'll poke a little bit first, right? Because HR, so we had a CEO when I was at National City, used to come in the lunchroom to see HR people, and he'd say, how are things in personnel? And, that's a little anachronism, right? And so like a boss might be a little anachronistic, because we talk now about managers and leaders, right? But pick your terminology. It goes back to all the things we've talked about earlier in this conversation, right? You got to know how business works. So HR like a boss is about being cognizant of how the business runs and how you, in your role of HR, can help achieve better outcomes for the business. And hopefully a big part of that is helping people build great careers. So if you look at my website, I talk about, it's a collection of great careers. You help people build great careers. And as they do that, it can't help but propel the company to greatness. So a company should be a collection of people all having great careers in its ideal state. That's what being HR like a boss means to me.
Great job, Gary. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the HR Like a Boss podcast. If it resonates with you, please leave a rating or review, or better yet, subscribe and share with a friend. Until next time, let's continue to aspire to do amazingly awesome HR.